Today we're talking about test knits. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie and I sometimes go by Fiber Gremlin on this particular channel. I am a fashion scholar and archivist and also an avid knitter, and I make content about knitting, my work in historical fashion archives, and sometimes also about neurodivergency. If that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and let's get into the video. So as you can see, I have been doing quite a few test knits as of late, and I know that test knits can be a little bit of a controversial topic, so I wanted to show you first what I've been test knitting and then talk about my thoughts on test knits as somebody who has now completed probably more than I should have been doing over the last 6 months. If you don't know what test knitting is, it's a part of the pattern design process in which a knitwear designer asks people to test the pattern for accuracy, clarity, and to make sure that the pattern actually has the desired end result of the kind of garment or object that you are making. This usually happens after a pattern has been written, graded, and tech edited, and then it goes to the people who test knit it, basically acting as people testing for quality assurance of the pattern. Now, test knits can be a little bit controversial because of some of the expectations around knitting, the timeline, the cost of materials, so on and so forth, but we will get to that in the second half of the video. But for now, I want to show you what I've been test knitting because they are so cool. So first things first, I unlocked sock knitting. I don't remember exactly when I knit my first socks. I do think it was last year, and since then I have knit 4.5 pairs, although one of those is a gift knit for Christmas. So in total, I now have 3.5 pairs of my very own hand knit socks. I love them so very dearly, and as October is finally starting to cool down a little bit in the Midwest, they have come so in handy. So when I came across Fiorcini's first pattern, which happened to be a sock, I knew that I wanted to sign up for the test knit. This is her very first pattern, and boy howdy was I impressed that this was somebody's very first pattern. Now the thing is, once you've gotten to know a little bit about sock knitting, socks are pretty much formulaic, and I find that unless you're doing color work, they can get a little bit boring. But one of the reasons why I love following Fiorcini Knits on Instagram is because she adds unexpected details to her patterns that just add that little bit of extra something, a little bit of interest, both when it comes to knitting the actual thing that you're knitting and also the way that the end product looks. So these socks feature a little picot edge, a really beautiful Estonian inlay colorwork design on the cuff, and then these pearl ridges at the bottom of the cuff and at the toe that, again, they just add that like tiny little bit of visual interest that turned something simple like a sock into really just a very unexpectedly cute, pretty, dare I even say beautiful piece of clothing for your wardrobe. Her designs and her eye for detail really elevate those everyday basics like a pair of socks into something that I'm like excited to show off. Like, I've been trying to decide what pair of shoes I'm going to wear them with for the first time and what outfit they're going to go with. I suppose I should also tell you guys what materials I used for all of these test knits. I'm really bad at remembering to give those kinds of details. One of the other cool things about Fiorcini Knits, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right by the way, is that she uses almost, I think, entirely secondhand or thrifted yarn cones. So she leaves a lot of wiggle room for what materials you want to pick out because she doesn't use a specific brand of yarn. So I picked out English Rose Malabrigo, and then this Estonian inlay part is just some scrap yarn. One of my favorite local yarn shops sells these little balls of scrap. It seems like it's a 100% kind of rustic type of wool, and I was going for something that was heavier weight than the sock yarn so that the Estonian inlay really popped. The next test knit is also a sock. I have not finished the second one yet. I got a little bit burnt out on sock knitting, but this is also by Fiorcini Knits, and this is the Memory Twine sock. Again, just she adds those little details to something as simple as a sock that make them really interesting to wear and really interesting to knit. These socks have a cabled cuff as well as cables on the heel flap. I wanted to go for a bit of a short look for these socks so that I could wear them with like a pair of loafers or maybe like a pair of Mary Janes and just have that pop of red. These are also Malabrigo sock yarn in the color Ravelry Red. I really, really love Malabrigo sock yarn, the way that it feels, the way that it holds onto its elasticity, and the way that it doesn't pill as fast as other sock yarns that I've tried. So that is my second test knit. The next one that I have for you guys is perhaps a fan favorite. Sweaters and cardigans with the diagonal butt band are Katie. Sweaters and cardigans with the diagonal button band are kind of all the rage right now. Think the Valerie vest by Petite Knits and the Clematis sweater by Emma's Knitting. This here is the second iteration of the Clematis sweater, which is the chunky version of the sweater. I think that the original Clematis sweater is absolutely gorgeous. I just was not in the mood to knit something with fingering weight yarn. So when I saw that Emma's Knitting was doing a test knit for the chunky version, I want to hop right onto that train and knit myself something perhaps a little bit trendy. I don't think that diagonal button bands are so trendy that I'm wasting my time by knitting something like this, because it's just a bit of an extra little detail. I'm noticing a theme in all of these test knits that I'm doing that adds a little bit of a twist to something that is classic and otherwise a little bit basic. And I don't mean basic as a bad term, just basic as in like how many cardigans can you have with a straight button band. So the diagonal button band, I think, even though it might be like a little bit trendy right now, doesn't mean that it's not going to continue to be stylish for years to come. Anyways, with all that said, this is my Clematis chunky sweater. Things that I really love about this pattern. I actually learned quite a lot about construction in making this pattern. This was my very first time doing set-in sleeves on a sweater, so first of all, I learned how to do that. And I also feel like I learned a lot about the kind of knitting math and the thought process that goes behind that kind of math when doing the neckline, because the thing about a diagonal button band is that doing the neckline, it's not your typical, increasing the same amount on each side and then casting on stitches to join the neck. It's offset, so you have to keep track of a lot of different things as you're going. So it was challenging and engaging because you're increasing one side of the button band, decreasing the other side, while also increasing for the arm, while also doing the offset neckline. So it was one of those knitting patterns where once I hit the stockinette, I could just keep going. But the construction was really interesting. It was a little bit novel, which my ADHD brain absolutely loves, and it taught me a lot of new things, which is honestly something I want to get out of pretty much any like new knitting pattern that I pick up. I don't want to make a million, stockinette in the round sweaters because I'm not so interested in the final product. I'm much more interested in the actual process of doing the knitting. So if the pattern itself is interesting, intriguing, or uses construction techniques that I'm not familiar with, it makes the knitting process so much more fun. Beside the pattern, other things I really love about this sweater are, first of all, the diagonal button band. I'm also digging the slight balloon sleeves. I also learned how to do Italian bind off for this sweater, so the finishes are all very clean and very pretty, and I think that is possibly one of my favorite details in anything that I've knit henceforth, is doing a tubular or an Italian bind off, because it just looks so freaking good and it has such a good stretch and elasticity to it that it's appropriate for so many different areas of binding off, especially for cuffs and necklines. I also am absolutely in love with the look of this yarn. I think that tweed yarns are absolutely gorgeous, and I did use the recommended yarn from the pattern, which is the Kremke Soul Wool Silky Kid, which is a mohair, and then the Erica Knights Yarns Pure Tweed, and you hold them together. The only thing I don't really like about this pattern and this sweater is, while the yarn is beautiful, it is a very scratchy wool. Once I've put it on and I've worn it for a little while and adjusted to the texture, it doesn't bother me so much. I haven't really had the chance to reach for it and wear it and make a better determination of whether or not it's something that will prohibit me from wearing it, because I finished it in July and it has been really, really hot in the Midwest ever since then. Thank you, climate change. So I will report back once I get the chance to actually wear this sweater a little bit. I do think that the yarn is absolutely beautiful to look at, though. I think tweeds are some of my favorite yarns, visually speaking, there's just so much depth and variety to them that I am a little bit obsessed, and I have far too many of them in my yarn stash at the moment. So that is my third test knit I have to share with you guys, and I actually think it would be really cute with this skirt. I will have to keep this outfit in mind once it actually dips below 60. And last but not least, for sharing my recent test knits with you, we have the Loon sweater by CM Knits. Would you believe me if I told you that this was my very first stranded colorwork pattern? And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to sign up for this test knit, but another reason why I wanted to sign up for this test knit is because I actually heard about this test knit through the Instagram profile Knit Them, which I think they're either on a break or they're just not using that Instagram at the moment, but they created an archive of knitting patterns that use language that is more friendly to trans and non-binary people, and this pattern goes by certain chest measurements that aren't dependent upon having a bust, and I might not entirely have what they call a cisgender, so I wanted to contribute my skills to trying out a pattern that is more friendly to the trans and non-binary community as I'm exploring my gender expression. And I also just really love birds, and I really wanted to try stranded colorwork. I've done Estonian inlay, I've done intarsia, I've done duplicate stitch, I've even done double knitting, I think is what it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know, where like it's, if you use two colors on one side, it's the inverted colors on the other side. And then now I've done stranded colorwork. I had a little bit of a hard time knitting this sweater. I did have to frog back multiple times over and over again because I got something wrong in the stranded colorwork, and because this is a test knit, I really cared about getting it right. I'm not often a perfectionist when it comes to knitting, but when it comes to test knits, I do like to try to get it as close to what the pattern describes as possible, because the point is to test it for quality and accuracy. So I did have to go back and undo this quite a few times. And also, I thought I had enough yarn to knit this sweater, and I did not. The problem with that, though, is that this yarn is from Joann's, and as we all know... Hi, hello, welcome from my desk in my office. Something absolutely horrific went wrong with my microphone. A faint buzz began just seconds after the last clip that you saw and slowly grew into a very loud buzz, and then the microphone just cut out completely. So there's about like 10 minutes of footage where there's just no audio. So we're back on a different day to film the rest of this video. No microphone, so I apologize for the change in the audio. I do have a microphone attached to my camera, so hopefully that makes the audio at least acceptable, and let's continue on with the video. My desk chair is also really creaky, so I apologize for those sounds. Anyways, it is quite a few days later, and obviously it is cool enough to wear my sweater. Yay! I have worn this sweater non-stop since it finally got cold in Illinois a couple of days ago. I've been on a sweater-based outfit repeat for the last 4 days. Listen, it's cold outside, it's warm, it's cozy. I'm very proud of it, and I think we should all wear our knits that we're proud of. And I only have 3 hand knit sweaters, so there's not a lot of variety to choose from at the moment. Anyways, back to the story at hand. The yarn that I made this sweater out of was in fact a yarn from Joann's, and as we all know, Joann's does not exist anymore. Rest in peace, pour one out, we miss her so much, but this meant that I had to go searching to see if I could potentially find anybody who was selling this yarn secondhand. And thank you to whatever powers that be, there was one Etsy seller who not only had the yarn that I was looking for, as in like the brand, and had enough quantity for me to finish the sweater, had the right colors, but also had the right dye lots. It was meant to be. Whatever divine powers that brought that together blessed me with the yarn that I needed to finish the sweater. So I did in fact manage to finish the sweater on time for the test knit, which closes in 5 days. I'm looking at my calendar over here. In 5 days. Got to take some pictures, sent them to the designer, and the pattern should be available on November 1st. Definitely follow CM Knits, and also everyone that I've mentioned so far on Instagram for more regular updates, Ravelry, and wherever else they have social media, but Instagram is the main place that I follow these folks from. That's pretty much the end of that story. I do not remember what else I said about this sweater in the footage because, as I said, the microphone cut out, so all of that is lost to the ether. And that brings us to the end of all the things that I have knit this year. which means that I have just a couple of thoughts to go over about test knitting in general. I talked for far too long last time, so I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more succinct this time. I have my points. Let's get into it. So the thing about test knitting is that it can be a little bit controversial for a variety of reasons. The two main points that I see tend to come up when people discuss the woes, the mores, the pros and cons, if you will, of doing test knitting is the cost of people's time and materials, and also it being a popularity contest. I can understand why people view test knitting as a popularity contest. I'm not entirely sure why people are bothered by that. Now hear me out before you get mad, okay? When knitwear designers are choosing people to test a knitting pattern, I do believe that it has not been uncommon in the past for knitwear designers to select test knitters for a pattern based on the amount of following that they have on a particular social media platform. I do think that this is relatively unfair because it doesn't give plenty of people who are thoroughly skilled at their knitting the chance to contribute to the knitting community in some kind of way. I can't understand how somebody might think that that's like a strategic move marketing wise, that if they have somebody with a lot of followers doing a test knit and that person posts their test knit, that gets them exposure and so on and so forth. And you know, that might be true. Does it suck? I suppose, yeah, I would prefer if people were a little bit meritocratic, but also if that's the way that a knitwear designer is going to operate, do I really want to test knit for them anyways? I just think that if that is the reasoning and like the strategy behind choosing a test knitter or a group of test knitters, that's not somebody that I want to be test knitting for anyways, and I guess I'm glad that they overlooked me. I think I also just have gotten lucky with the test knits that I've gotten into because there is very clear evidence in those test knit groups that the people were chosen for a variety of reasons, not just follower count. There have been people with a variety of follower accounts in the test knit groups that I've been a part of, ranging from, you know, a couple of dozen all the way up to tens of thousands. So I think I've been lucky in my experience thus far, and but there are also plenty of test knits that I haven't gotten into that maybe people with a larger following have, but I don't take it personally. I don't take any rejection to a test knit application personally at all. In my opinion, like, it's cool to get into a test knit, but if I don't, I'll just get the pattern later. The next thing is the idea of compensating test knitters for their time, effort, labor, and then the cost that goes into the material. I have a couple of thoughts about this. On the one hand, I do entirely see how that is fair. On the other hand, I don't think it should be entirely on the onus of the knitwear designer to fully fund other people's materials for knitting something. I think in the system that we live in, it's a little bit of, not a catch-22, like a zero-sum game, I guess. Nobody really wins in that scenario. I do think it's awesome if a knitwear designer can collaborate with a particular yarn brand, like the recommended yarn for the pattern, and get a discount for the test knitters. That's awesome because then you don't have to spend as much money. But all of the test knits that I've been a part of also don't require that you use a specific type of yarn, especially Fioricini Knits. I still don't know if I'm saying her name correctly. She uses, like I said, all secondhand yarns, so it doesn't really matter what yarn you do use as long as you're meeting gauge. That means that you can use whatever yarn you have already in your stash, go out and buy secondhand yarn, whatever fits your budget. When it comes to compensating people's labor and time though, my perspective on it, my philosophy, and I understand that this is not the case for everybody because free time unfortunately is a privilege and we do not all get the chance to use that free time in this way, but in my life, in my context, the free time that I do have, one, I'm going to be spending it knitting anyways, at least most likely spending it knitting, and two, I kind of see using my time to do a test knit as a part of contributing to my community in a way. I want to be knitting these things anyways. I would be spending that time knitting anyways. I would be spending money on that yarn anyways. I might as well put some of that effort towards being mutually beneficial in some way, I guess. I get to test a pattern, I get to give my feedback, I get to make something cool, the knitwear designer gets my feedback, gets photos, essentially some free marketing, and I think that that's a pretty fair exchange. So personally, I just see that as being a part of my community. I don't necessarily think that all the things that I do need to be compensated. I do expect people to respect my time, and I would never do a test knit that I thought didn't have enough time to complete it in a reasonable manner. So philosophically speaking, it is how I envision myself in my role, my position in the knitting world, the knitting community, is that it's mutually beneficial. I'm going to be spending that time doing it anyways. We both might as well get something out of it. Now again, not everybody has that kind of free time, not everybody has that kind of money. Not to say that like I make a ton of money. My partner's in grad school, so we're living on a single income at the moment. And not everybody wants to knit for other people. Even if you get to keep the finished object, it's still knitting for a purpose or knitting for a reason, knitting with a deadline. And I can see why people wouldn't want to do that. But speaking of deadlines, last thought on test knits is I actually love a deadline. I love having a reason to do something, and I love having a deadline because I have ADHD, and my ADHD brain has a hard time getting anything done if I do not have a clear, distinct purpose, reason, and timeline to do it in. There are a ton of projects that I've started and never finished because I essentially didn't have enough structure to finish them with. So having my work be reliant upon another person by a particular time guarantees that it's gonna get it done. It's just that extra, like, little bit of external pressure that my brain needs to unlock my executive functioning skills to actually work on something steadily through time to get it finished. Again, that's not something everyone's going to experience, but it's definitely something that I love. It's just like, it adds some excitement, it adds some flavor to something that I might otherwise lose interest in, especially once you've gotten onto like the body of a sweater and all you're doing is stockinette in the round. And yeah, I think that's about it. I apologize for the change of scene and the change of audio, but hopefully you still enjoyed this video in some way. I would love to know what your thoughts are on test knitting. Have you done it? Have you not? If you've done it, how do you feel about it? If you haven't done it, do you want to try it? Don't forget to go and check out all of the patterns that I mentioned. I will leave links to them or the Knitwear designer if the pattern's not out yet in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe, and that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.